So that for the 3.1, 3.4 reteach notes, what I want to do is show you um, some steps or some kind of cheats to make it a little bit easier for you. So I've tried to find examples and problems that are going to come out clean, that you're going to be able to use a graphing calculator to help you find those key points to help you go from standard form to factored and vertex form, or from vertex form to factored form and standard form. So I just want to make sure that we can use the calculator. So if you don't have a graphing calculator, go and grab one really quick. And if you don't have one at home, then pull up Desmos and you can graph it on there. So our very first thing is that we want to sketch the graph. And so you'll notice that I have the 6 things that I want you to do for each problem. Okay. And so the very first thing is to sketch the graph. And when I ask you to sketch the graph, that means I want exact points that you're going to put in your calculator. And so in this case, I want a T-chart written down on your paper. If I'm writing it in factored form, then that means I want it to look like y is equal to a times x minus your x-intercepts and x minus your other x-intercept if there's 2. If I want vertex form, then it's y is equal to a times x minus h squared plus k. When it asks for the axis of symmetry, remember that is x is equal to your h value, and then your vertex is your hk value. Okay, and then your intercept should be written as points. Okay, so these should be written as points, and we're looking for the y-intercepts. So the y-intercept is going to be 0 something, and your x-intercepts are going to be your p-value and 0 and q-value and 0. And then you've got domain and range. And remember, with domain and range, it's nice because domain is always the same. Domain is always negative infinity to infinity, but I need to see that. And then remember that your range is based off of your k value. So the range is either going to be negative infinity to k if it's a downwards one, so negative infinity to k, or it's going to be from k up to infinity if it's up. Okay, and we've talked about this before. If it goes up, then it starts at the bottom and goes up, and if it's negative infinity to k, then it's going to start, it's going to go down. Okay, so it's going to go down, and it's going to start at negative infinity and go up. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. So when I look at the first problem and I'm asking for a T-chart, what that means is that I'm going to look at my graph. I'm going to put it in the graphing calculator. So if I put this in the graphing calculator, let me scoot it over here so you can see. So when I put it in the graphing calculator, let's try that again. I'm going to put it up in this top one, and I'm just going to put it in exactly the way it looks. So I'm going to go negative x squared plus 4x minus 3. So I put it in exactly the way it looks. And then for me to get a T-chart or the table, I'm going to go second graph. And this is my T-chart. And what I want to do is pick values that are going to fit on this graph. And so you can kind of take a look at your graph. Notice the smallest y is a -4. And my smallest x is a -1. So I'm going to go down a little bit because I don't have a point. I don't have a -1. Okay, the smallest value I have is -1. But then when I look at the y, it's -8. So that's not going to fit either. So I'm going to go down one more and start at 0. And now I'm just going to write down those points that will fit on my graph. And so everybody should have this on your calculator already, because I'm hoping you guys are doing this with me. And so we're going to write down the points that we can put on. So we're going to go from 0 down to 4, it looks like. Because if I go down one more, let's just double check. If I look at 5, I'm at -8, which doesn't fit. So I'm just going to look at the points from 0 to 4 and write those points down. So you guys do that from your calculator as well. And so we've got 0, -3. We have 1, 0. We had 2, 1, 3, 0, and 4, -3. All right, so those are the values that fit. And so what we're going to do with that is we're going to graph those. And so I'm going to go 0, -3, 1, 0, 2, 1, 3, 0, and 4, -3. Okay, so that's what my picture looks like. And so I'm going to connect those dots and it should make a U, and hopefully you're kind of seeing that. Now, you can always double check, like I can push graph and see that my graph is going to be close to that, okay? It's looking like my window looks a little bit different, but notice that the general picture is the same. It's crossing over here at -3. It's crossing the x-axis at 1 and 3. So you can kind of see that we're on the right track. All right, so now when I go to the B part, which is put it in factored form, what I'm looking for then is as I look at this U, I'm looking for the x-intercepts. So it crosses at 1 and it crosses at 3. And when I look at my equation, the value that's in front of the x squared is our a value. So when I go to put it in my factored form, I'm going to do a, which is -1, and then I'm going to go parentheses. And remember that these, if I'm doing factored form, these are both x's. And where does it cross the x-axis? It crosses at 1. And so we do the opposite sign, remember, and it crosses at 3. So we do the opposite sign. And so that would be factored form. When I go to put that in vertex form, so let me scoot this up a little bit. When I go to put it in vertex form, remember vertex form is a times x minus h squared plus k. So I'm going to go y is equal to a, which is -1. It's going to be x. And then I need my vertex point. This is my vertex point right here. This is the point 2, 1. This is h. This is k. So remember, it's always minus. So it's going to be the opposite. So -2 squared plus 1. Okay, so that's the vertex form. So now from standard form, I graphed it, and now I have factored form and vertex form without having to, I don't have to do a box to factor. I could, but I don't need to. I don't have to complete the square to get vertex form or the -b/2h. We can, but what I'm trying to do is make it so it's a little bit easier for us just to use the graphing calculator to get those key points. So now when I go to do the D is asking for our axis of symmetry, which is x is equal to this value that it folds across, which is the 2. So x is equal to 2. And then we already wrote our vertex. Our vertex is 2, 1. And then E is doing our intercepts. So E is talking about where does this graph cross the y-axis. So it crosses here at 0, -3. And then it crosses the x-axis at 1, so 1, 0, and at 3, 0. Okay, so these are the points that I'm caring about here, here, and here in orange. And then the last thing that we're asked to do is do domain and range. Okay, domain, remember, is always -infinity to infinity. That never changes. And then the range in this case is going from the bottom, and it's going up until I reach the highest point of y. So my range starts down here, and it goes up until it hits this point. And so it goes from -infinity all the way up to 1, and that would be my range. And it's going to be a bracket. Notice how nice that is if we can use the graphing calculator. It makes our life so much easier. So we're going to do the same thing with number 2. Again, our first step is to use our calculator and put our value in. So again, we're going to put our calculator, we're going to go to y equals, we're going to clear that out and put the new equation in, which is 2x squared plus 4x, and we're going to graph. Now again, or we can either graph it or we can just look at the table. I say look at the table. So second graph is how we get to the table. Again, I've tried to pick values that are going to come out nice for not only your vertex point, but your x-intercepts. That's not always the case, but that's what I want us to practice today. So again, this is our x and our y, and what we're looking for is, as we look at our t-chart, we're looking to see we can go as far down as -3 and up as 7. And right and left, it looks like we can go to 4 and -6. So we don't want to go anything smaller than -6, but if I look at -6, I'm at 30 for my y. So we are going to go down until my y's are something that I can fit on my graph. So I can fit 6 on my graph. So we're going to start at -3, 6, and we're going to go down until it looks like 1, 6. And we're just going to write those points down. Okay, so you guys should have that in your calculator, so you should be able to write those points down as well and graph them. So we'll just pause for a second and have you guys do that. And then when you come back on, you can look to see, like when you pause the video, and then let's look back and see if you've got your graph correct. So when we go to graph these, we're at -3, 6. We're at -2, 0. We're at -1, -2, 0, 0, and then 1, 6. So again, notice how it creates that U shape. When you look at your graph, again, we have this a value is in front of x squared. So when I go to write my equation in vertex form, remember that I need that a value. So I'm going to have y is equal to 2, and then we are looking at where it crosses the x-axis. So it crosses at x, and it's -2, so it's minus -2, and then x minus 0. And minusing a -2 is really the same thing as adding 2. And then x minus 0 is the same thing as x. So I could really rewrite this as x minus 0 is just x, and this would be x plus 2. And maybe I'll just leave it as minus minus and do our rewrite. Okay, that's why it's the opposite. It's always minus, and then because it's minusing negative, it's plus 2. And then our C time is we're writing in the vertex form. So again, as we look at our graph, this is our vertex. So that is the point -1, -2. So when I go to write it in vertex form, I'm writing y is equal to the a value, which is 2. And then it's going to be x minus 1. So minus -1, which is really plus 1. We can write it in if we need to. And then minus 2. And so if I rewrite that, that's going to be 2 times minusing a negative is really plus. And if you guys have been struggling with knowing if it's a positive or a negative inside parentheses, this format is always minus. So when you put the point in and you see the -1, then you can know minusing a negative is a plus. And so you can do that extra step until it starts getting a little bit easier for you. And then once we're there, the rest of it is based off of like this problem. So when we look at the axis of symmetry, it's x is equal to, and we're looking at that imaginary line that it folds over, which remember is always the h value of your vertex. So it's -1, and then we already have our vertex at -1, -2. And then our E is where does it cross our x and y axis. So when we look at our x-axis or y-axis, it crosses right here at the 0, 0. So it's crossing at 0, 0, which is an x-intercept and a y-intercept, and then it also crosses on the other side at -2, 0. And then as we look at domain and range, same idea. So if I look at domain, the domain is going to be -infinity to infinity because it's always that. And then when we look at the range, notice that on our range for this one, it starts here and it goes up. Okay. So it starts, we're always reading it from bottom to top, but this time when I look at it, we kind of want to, it still goes up, but it's starting down here and going up. This one starts at the bottom, which is at -2 and goes up to infinity, where the other one started at -infinity and went up to 1. So like it stopped here. So when we look at that, we're just going to write -2 with a bracket up to infinity. Okay, and again, that's when we're given standard form. We can get the other forms from that. So now when I look at the next page or the back of your notes, it's kind of the same idea. We're doing the same thing, but now we have vertex form, and we're going to go from vertex form into factored form, and then from factored form into standard form and do the same thing. Okay, so our steps are still the same in the fact that we're still doing six things here. Our first step is still the same of graphing. So when I look at this, I'm still going to go, A is still doing a T-chart and graphing my points that I want to put on my graph. And so I'm going to go to my calculator, go to y equals, clear that out, and we're going to put in our equation exactly the way it looks. So we're going to go parentheses, x minus 3, close your parentheses, push x squared, and then minus 4. Now, if you raise it to a power, if you use the caret sign, the little mountain key, then you're going to have to arrow over to do minus 4. But if you use the x squared key, then it's going to automatically just put the 2 up top and bring your little blinking box down to the bottom. So from here, same idea. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to push second graph, and you're going to pick the points that we are going to use. Remember, as I look at my grid, I can go, it looks like my smallest x value is a 0 and my smallest y value is a -5. So I don't want to use any x's until I get to x being 0, because that's the smallest x that I can use. And then we might need to go down further to see where we can stop, but it looks like we're going to stop at 6, because that's the, well, 6 is 5, so it doesn't fit. We're actually going to go from, it looks like 0 to 5 and write down those points. So you do that and I'll do that, and then graph the points, and then we'll come back. For -3 and 5, 0. So then we're just going to graph those points. So we were at 0, 5, which actually didn't fit. So 1, 0, 2, -3, 3, -4, 4, -3, and 5, 0. So it looks like my graph's going to look like this. Again, hopefully you notice that it should have gone up because there's no negative sign out in front. We also know that there's no number there, which makes our A be 1, just to keep track of that. All right, so then as we look at the next part is writing it in factored form. So notice again, nothing's changed. Y is equal to A is 1, so we can put it in or we don't need to. And then we're going to put in our factored form. So this is x, and it crosses at +1 and +5. So it's x minus 1, x minus 5, because that's factored form. Again, if we want to go through that, if you need to write it down again, this is a times x minus p, x minus q. Standard form is y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. Vertex and axis of symmetry is the same thing. X is equal to h. The vertex is your hk point. And then your intercepts are still going to be both y and x intercepts. Okay. And then domain and range the same. Okay. So then as we look at this, we've got our values where our x-intercepts are. And then when it goes to the next step of us writing it in standard form, this is where we want to multiply using the box. And so we're going to draw our box. We're going to use those factors, so x minus 1 and x minus 5, and we're going to multiply it out. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 1 is negative 1x. Negative 5 times x, negative 5x, and negative 5 times negative 1 is positive 5. So we do the box, and then we just simplify. Remembering that a in this case is 1, so I don't need to worry about it, but I can put it in if I need to. And then I've got x squared. I'm going to add these two because they're like terms. And so we're going to get negative 5x plus negative 1x, which is negative 6x. And then our 5 gets tagged on at the end. And this would be standard form. And then for D, we're going to write down our vertex and our axis of symmetry. So x is equal to, notice that it's crossing or it goes through this point right here. My vertex was 3, negative 4. Notice that you also have that from here. Here's h and here's k. So we have that information from our equation. So x is equal to 3, and our vertex is the point 3, negative 4. And then our intercepts are where does it cross the x and y axis. So in this case, we don't have our y-axis point on our graph, although we do have it in our chart if we start at 0. Okay, so we've got our x-intercepts or our y-intercept at 0, 5, and our x-intercepts at 1, 0, and 5, 0. Which again, we can see in our T chart, we can see it off of our graph. We just couldn't see this one on our graph because it didn't fit in this case. And then when we look at domain and range, same idea. Domain is still negative infinity to infinity. It always is that. And, domain. And when I look at range, in this case, notice that my y values start here at negative 4, and then they continue up forever. So it's going to go, not negative infinity, sorry, go to infinity. And so when I go to write that, it's a bracket negative 4 to infinity. And then we should be okay. As I look at number 4, we're going to do a T-chart. Here's my X and Y. And again, the same idea. First step is get our calculator, and we're going to find our points. So I want everybody to try to do this part on their own, and then we'll come back and make sure we're good. So these are the points that I wrote down. So I've got negative 4, negative 3, negative 3, 0, negative 2, 1, negative 1, 0, 0, negative 3, and it looks like 1, negative 8 didn't fit. So my graph looks like this. When I look at my picture or up here, I want you to notice a couple things. Here's my A value as a negative 1, and then notice that here's my H and my K value, which usually, as I look at that, here's my H and K. So this is the point negative 2, positive 1, because remember, it's the opposite, and then whatever K is, and we're going to go from there. So again, as I look at B, remember that your y-intercepts are here and here. So when I go to put it in intercept form, I'm going to have negative because A is a negative 1. And then we have x minus negative 3 and x minus negative 1. So when I go to simplify that, I'm just going to get negative x plus 3 and x plus 1. And then from there, we're going to go into standard form. And so into standard form, we're going to do our box as our first step. And remember, when I have that negative sign is not that -1 here doesn't come into play until we're all the way done. So we've got x in 3 and x in 1. So x times x is x squared, x times 3 is 3x, 1 times x is 1x, 1 times 3 is 3. And now when I go to put it in standard form, I want to worry about that negative sign. So the -1's going to stay there now from up above. And now I've got x squared. I'm going to combine these two because they're like terms. So that's going to give us the plus 4x in the middle plus 3. But now I'm going to take that -1 and distribute it to everything. So I'm going to go y is really equal to -x squared, -4x, -3. And then that's it. And then when I look at D, we've got the axis of symmetry, which again is this value that goes, the line, remember it's always a line that goes through the middle of your graph. And so x is equal to -2, because that's the line that it goes through. And then your vertex was -2, 1, which we wrote down up top. And then when I look at E, again, I can either look at my T chart and see where your zeros are, okay, in the X column or the Y column, though that will give you your intercepts, or you can look at your picture because it's got -3, -1, and 0, -3. So we have all of those points. You can either see that in your chart or you can see that off of your graph. So we've got -3, 0, -1, 0, which are our x-intercepts, and then our y-intercept was 0, -3. And then our last step again is domain and range. So we've got domain and range. Domain, remember, is always -infinity to infinity. And when I look at my range for this one, notice that I'm always going from bottom to top, but my bottom this time is -infinity, and then it's going to stop at this point, which is at +1. So it's going to go -infinity up until it hits that point of 1. So we're going to go -infinity to 1, and then it's a bracket on the 1. All right, hopefully that's a little bit better for the 3.1, 3.4. You'll notice that your assignment is going to be very similar to it. I also tried to make sure that your assignment are like the numbers are going to be nice and clean like our examples here. So if you're getting something weird, then you need to go back and look at your calculator, your graph, and make sure you're using the correct points because everything should come out nice. So we will work on that today. And then on Tuesday, we'll go over questions. If you're struggling, make sure you get on Zoom on Friday. But we'll go over questions at the beginning of class, and then we're going to do a little quiz on Tuesday when I see you. And then we'll see where we're at, if we can move on and look at 3.5 and 3.7, or if we're going to have to push that back a little bit. So remember, if you have questions, ask. Also remember that all your late work is due Monday. So get on Zoom on Friday, tomorrow, if you need help between 10 and 3. I'll talk to you then.